They say Dean Martin was never afraid of anything. But that night, fear finally touched his face. The backroom door clicked shut behind him, soft but final. That's amore leaked through the wall as a dull blur of bass and laughter. In here, a single lamp threw yellow light over a small table, air soured by old smoke. Dean sat in a low-leather chair, jacket still on, tie loosened. Across from him, a man in a dark suit adjusted his cuffs with slow care. Cigarette between two fingers, narrow tie, polished shoes. He didn't introduce himself. The two quiet men by the door made introductions unnecessary. "Mr. Martin," the man said, smooth, almost courteous. "The boss sends his compliments. Fine show tonight." On stage, Dean's grin had come easy, the kind that made people believe nothing ever bothered him. Now the smile he offered was small and controlled. One hand rested on his knee, thumb pressing an even beat into the fabric. "Kinda him," he replied. "Hope he at least clapped." A hint of amusement touched the man's mouth, then vanished. He leaned forward just a fraction. Smoke rose between them in a thin line. "The boss," he said more quietly, "would like to clear up one small question about your friend. Sammy." The name shifted the air. Dean didn't move, but his next breath was deeper, slower. He saw Sammy in his mind, backstage grin, tap of knuckles on his dressing room door, the way their timing locked together on stage as if they shared one set of nerves. Long nights, long drives, private jokes. Friend never quite covered it. "What kind of question?" Dean asked. The curve on his lips stayed in place, his eyes cooled. The man tapped ash into an empty glass. "Some people are concerned," he said, placing each word, "about the company your friend has been keeping, about whether he remembers who keeps these doors open." Out in the club, applause swelled and faded. Inside the small room, nothing shifted. The two at the door stood as still as coat racks, but their attention pressed on him like weight. Dean understood. This wasn't courtesy after a set. It was a warning phrased as concern. "You boys taking surveys now?" he asked lightly. Beneath the joke, an old promise stirred. You don't give up a man who trusts you. Fear arrived as calm calculation, not panic. They could close his rooms, freeze the calls, make bookings vanish. He laced his fingers to hide the tension and met the man's gaze. "So we're not really talking about Sammy," Dean said, voice low. "We're talking about what you want from me." He didn't say yes or no, not yet. But the choice was already there, sharp and narrow, loyalty on one side, safety on the other, and every word from this point would push someone closer to danger. Years before this room, before the polite threats and careful smiles, the same song floated over very different nights. Back then, Las Vegas was smaller, hungrier. Neon looked brighter because the desert around it was so dark. Every big room had a name on the marquee. And behind that name, somewhere in the half-shadow, stood the men who owned the carpets, the liquor, the tables, the doors. If you worked the strip and people paid to see you, you eventually shook hands with someone whose first name was the only one spoken. Dean learned early. You didn't have to love those men, but you needed to understand them. They liked talent, but they respected usefulness. A full house brought them money. A dependable singer, one who never canceled, never caused noise in the papers, was insurance. Sammy had walked into that world like a burst of light. They weren't supposed to be brothers, different histories, different scars. Yet on stage, something locked into place. The first time Sammy ad-libbed around one of Dean's lines and the crowd roared, Dean felt that jolt. This isn't just another partner. This is a man who will catch whatever I throw at him. Off stage, it deepened. Long rehearsals that turned into story hours. Sammy in his shirt sleeves telling some disaster of a road gig until Dean wiped tears from his eyes. Dean pouring them both a drink after a show, saying, "You know, pal, you make this racket feel like less of a racket." For Dean, loyalty wasn't a slogan. It sat in his bones. You didn't hand over a friend because somebody with power got nervous. You didn't use a man's trust as currency. He hated raised voices, hated rooms where tempers took over, but there were lines he had never allowed anyone to push him across. Still, the business never stopped pressing. Rumors started soft, like a song coming from a neighboring room, a stagehand mentioning that some people didn't like who Sammy played cards with after hours, a booker hinting that certain names preferred to see Sammy less visible. The subtext found its way to Dean without anyone saying it outright. Your friend is becoming an issue. Because where Sammy went, Dean stood beside him. Their names began to appear as a pair. So when conversation shifted in the lounges and back offices, Dean's name floated nearby whether he wanted it or not. He found himself between currents. On one side, the man he trusted on stage more than he trusted most people in life. On the other, the silent network that could dim his spotlight with a single phone call. One night, in a quiet corner of a hotel bar, his longtime arranger, Lou, leaned in over his drink. "You get what they're hinting at, don't you?" Lou murmured. Dean swirled the ice in his glass. "They can hint all night. I don't turn on my own." Lou looked at him, steady. "They don't ask twice, Dean." "Good," Dean said. "Saves me repeating myself." He smiled, but it was a tired, worn thing. Every show seemed to carry a new price, another favor expected, another name he was supposed to avoid, another laugh someone wanted on demand. What Dean couldn't see then, what the narrator now lays bare, was that Sammy wasn't the true storm center. The tension had started earlier, years before any whisper about card games or late-night company. It began the night Dean politely refused a request from a man whose name never appeared in lights, but whose shadow stretched over half the town. Dean had said no once, and he'd thought the matter over. The men behind the doors had not. The dim room slid back into focus, like a lens tightening. Dean was still in the low chair, still facing the man with the narrow tie, but now his eyes moved differently, slower, cataloging. One of the guards had shifted so that his shoulder almost brushed the doorframe, too close to the only way out. The other stood a step behind Dean's chair, not in front of him where a polite escort might wait, but behind, where a hand could land on a shoulder if needed. On the table, the lamp's shade left the center in a small island of light. Two short glasses sat there, amber deep in both. Dean remembered asking the waiter for one whiskey before he'd been led back here. No one had asked what the second was for. The emissary noticed his glance and smiled faintly. "We took the liberty," he said. "You've earned it." The tone was courteous, the kind used in good restaurants. Underneath, something else moved. Ownership. Expectation. Dean had heard that sound before in other cities, from other men. The way someone spoke when they believed the evening already belonged to them. He wrapped his hand around the nearer glass. The cube of ice inside knocked against the side with a small chime that seemed to ring far louder than it should. The silence that followed made it worse. Outside, a door slammed somewhere in the club, the echo leaking down the hallway. Dean's shoulders tightened before he could stop them. The guard behind him didn't so much as blink. "About your friend," the emissary went on, voice smooth. "Sammy has broadened his social circle. There are people whispering he spends time with certain faces the boss does not appreciate." There was no anger in the man's delivery. It was almost sympathetic, as if he regretted bringing bad news. That gentleness made the words heavier. Dean let the whiskey sit on his tongue a moment. He knew Sammy's habits, knew exactly where he played cards, who he borrowed jokes from, who he avoided. The picture the emissary painted didn't match any of it. So somebody was lying, deliberately, carefully. Not to hurt Sammy directly, but to corner Dean. He set the glass down without looking away. The lamp above them flickered once, a brief tremor in the light, then steadied. It left half his face bright, the other half in shadow, like he was sitting between two versions of himself. "You sure your friends have their story straight?" Dean asked, mild as if he were discussing a missed cue. The emissary shrugged with one shoulder. Our information is thorough. The boss is only asking you to confirm. A word from you goes a long way. A word from you. Not an inquiry, not a conversation. A verdict. He thought of his kids asleep in a house far from this carpet, thought of contracts stacked on his dressing room table, of band members who counted on him to keep working, thought of Sammy's laugh ricocheting off concrete walls, the way that man trusted him without ever saying so out loud. Every answer he could give ran along a thin wire. Deny the story, and he protected his friend while putting himself in the crosshairs of whoever was pushing this lie. Agree, and he became the knife in Sammy's back, the proof these men needed. He shifted his gaze to the tabletop, more to break the line of the emissary's eyes than to study anything. That was when he saw it. A folded cocktail napkin tucked under the ashtray, logo printed in neat blue ink. Not this club's. The name belonged to the room he was booked into next week across town. They were already in that house too. He didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. The message was plain. This wasn't a single meeting after a show. This was an opening move in something that could follow him from stage to stage, room to room, city to city, until he gave them what they wanted. The emissary let the pause drag, then inclined his head. So, he said softly, "Can we count on your good judgment, Mr. Martin?" The hum of the air vent, the faint applause through the wall, the almost inaudible rustle of a guard shifting his weight, every small sound pressed in until it felt like the room itself was listening. Dean realized with a clarity that steadied him that these men hadn't come seeking his opinion on Sammy. They already knew what they wanted done. They were here to inform him of the role he was expected to play. The light above them gave a small hitch, then another. The bulb didn't quite blink out, just tremored, so the room seemed to breathe with it. Shadows lengthened a little on the emissary's face as he leaned across the table. "Let's not stretch this, Mr. Martin," he said quietly. "The boss would like you to have a word with Sammy. Firmly. Make sure he understands which friendships are unhealthy." He set his cigarette down, fingers precise. A man listens when a friend explains things, especially a friend whose name is on the same bill. No raised voice, no crude threat. Just that soft, educated tone, wrapping steel in velvet. The meaning landed clean. They wanted Dean to be the one who frightened Sammy, to plant the fear with a familiar hand. Then, if the worst ever came, Sammy wouldn't blame nameless men in dark suits. He would blame Dean. Images hit all at once, quick and sharp. Sammy in the wings, shoulders shaking with laughter. Sammy tapping his chest with one finger saying, "You and me, pal, were glued." His own kids at the breakfast table with cereal bowls and sleepy eyes. The two silent figures by the door now, watching him as if he were a card on the table. The emissary waited, studying him as if he could hear every thought. "This isn't a favor we're asking," he added softly. "It's an opportunity to prove you're with us." Dean's hands were still, but something in his face cooled. He lifted his eyes, and the easy stage charm was gone. There was nothing theatrical in what replaced it, just a harder clarity, as if a line had snapped taut inside. "When a man stands next to me that long," Dean said, his voice almost gentle, "I don't turn him into a message. Not for you. Not for anyone. No bravado, no joke to soften it, just plain words laid on the table." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Even the faint shudder in the light seemed to stop. Somewhere beyond the wall, the crowd broke into a roar of laughter, wild and distant, from a world where this conversation didn't exist. The emissary's eyes thinned a fraction. "The boss hears you're unwilling to help," he said slowly. "He will be disappointed. And you know what that means in this town." Dean understood very well. Doors closed, phones unanswered, maybe worse. Schedules wiped clean. Cars following at night. Accidents. The thought didn't make him any taller, but it straightened something in his spine. He leaned back just enough to show his hands were staying where they were. "You tell your boss," he replied, barely above a murmur. "I sing songs, I tell jokes, I don't hurt people I call brothers. If that disappoints him, he'll live longer than I do with it." The emissary regarded him for a long, level moment. Then he pushed his chair back with unhurried grace and stood. The guards opened the door without a word. "Think it over," the man said, smoothing his cuff. "Sometimes a man's mind improves after a night's sleep." The door sighed shut behind them. No slam, no stomp of footsteps. Just that soft click. In the sudden quiet, the room felt larger and emptier, as if the air itself had stepped back to see what he would do. From somewhere deep in his chest, steady and unwilling to be ignored, Dean heard it, the thud of his own heartbeat, loud as a drum in an empty theater. For the first time, he considered, calmly, almost curiously, that this might be the night he had just signed away his future.